alloy feedstock activities, the president of TTP Squared, Terry Perlis. Terry has 37 years experience in numerous metals industry roles with significant time spent in the vanadium and master alloy segments. Terry holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Virginia and an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh. He served as a member of the International Titanium Association Board of Directors from 2005 to 2009, and he's been a member of the Vanadium International Technical Committee since 2004, serving as chairman of the Vanatech Market Development Committee from 2012 to 2014. Please welcome Terry Perlis.
Thank you very much. First, thanks to Jennifer and the ITAA, the whole staff, for putting another fabulous conference together. Appreciate you all showing up for the last session here. And David apologized for losing his voice. I'll apologize for losing my mind with what's going on in the market right now. I've got a lot of slides here. We're going to go through it quickly and try and stay on time. I'm going to focus on the vanadium side. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk about this, please pop me an email. I'm happy to talk at any time. When we talk about vanadium, we've got to define production of vanadium first of all. And in my lexicon, we're looking at the production of vanidates or downstream products. So for example, slag generated in New Zealand and shipped elsewhere will show up as production at the location where that slag's being processed. So it's important just to have a common understanding of what we're looking at. If we look at historical production over the last 15 years or so, we've seen a pretty strong growth rate in production up through 2014. A lot of the production is coming from slag, steel mills primarily in China and Russia, processing vanadium titanium magnetite ores and generating a vanadium slag as a co-product from those mines. Looking at production by country, we see China is the largest producer. Looking back at the supply coming from China, China's really contributed almost all the growth in supply over this period. And we see the massive increase in steel slag-based vanadium production as the Chinese steel industry was expanding, and more recently we see moderation there as the steel production kind of reaches a peak. We also see the stone coal there from China, which came on in 2005 when we had a tremendous price spike. A lot of that capacity shut down when prices dropped below $10, and as we look ahead, that'll be important. It will be an important part of the picture that we see. Again, here's the Chinese steel-making slag. So it's really important to understand that the massive growth in supply has been fed by a growing Chinese steel industry. And certainly that situation is probably going to look different as we look ahead. Production by country, we see China, we see the decreases we've seen, and now with elevated market interest, we see some of the production coming back in China. We've actually had one steel mill stop producing vanadium in China, while another company in Sichuan province has been ramping up and will complete their ramp up of steel production and therefore vanadium production in 2018. South Africa production has decreased. This picture doesn't show the full extent. In the past, Highveld Steel in South Africa produced a tremendous amount of vanadium slag that was processed in Austria. But nevertheless, the demise of Highveld Steel has led to a decrease in vanadium production in South Africa. In North America, we've seen decreases in production as the producers struggle to find feedstocks. Most of the vanadium, in fact, all the vanadium production in North America as we speak, is based on recovering vanadium from spent catalyst or residues from burning or refining vanadium-bearing oil. A lot of that vanadium-bearing oil originates in Venezuela, and today Venezuela is producing about half as much oil as they did in 2008. So the U.S. producers have struggled in terms of sourcing raw materials. Really, the only good news here is Brazil, where the Largo mine at Marrakech has come online and is operating at capacity. They've just announced results for the third quarter, and production was actually about 2% above nameplate capacity. So you see the cycle we've gone through here from a production standpoint, peaking out in 2014 with very weak markets and some rationalizations. We saw decreased production, and now with better market conditions, we're seeing essentially everybody that can produce is producing right now. On the consumption side, again, China's the major driver. 90% of the vanadium that's consumed in the world goes into the steel industry. So this picture looks a lot like steel production on a global basis. Vanadium consumption, again, looking back for this 15-year period, grew at a very strong rate right up till 2014, and then we saw some significant decreases in consumption globally. And if you look at the picture, what you see is this was almost entirely a Chinese phenomenon. And again, you see by 2018, the consumption has picked up. So what happened? What we discovered was that in 2015, vanadium consumption in high-strength rebar in China dropped precipitously, while the actual production of high-strength rebar was fairly stable. An investigation discovered the fact that there was a lot of very small induction melting steel operations in China generating poor quality billets in these induction mills. They can't control the sulfur or the phos. So poor quality steel was being rolled and quench and tempered and sent out into the field as grade 3 rebar. Grade 3 rebar requires high yield strength, 350 megapascal yield strength minimum, and it also requires good elongation properties with a ultimate to yield strength ratio minimum of 1.25. And it's critical when you have this steel working in seismic activity. The quench and tempered steel is strong, but it's very brittle. It doesn't have the ductility necessary. And when you have an earthquake, this is when you see the buildings start pancaking floor on top of floor. And what was discovered was some mills were using quench and tempered steel, although the standard was really designed to prevent that sort of steel from going into these applications. So the standard has been revised, and effective November 1st, the revised standard takes place. And that revised standard does a few things. First of all, it eliminates grade 2 rebar. Grade 2 rebar was 300 megapascal yield strength, and most of the mills in China could make grade 2 without any alloy additions. So grade 2 is gone, and now in theory, all of the steel that was produced to grade 2 has to be produced at least to the grade 3 standard, which means you're going to have to alloy that steel. The other thing they've done is they've shut these induction melting operations down. Some 80 million tons of steelmaking capacity is gone. You won't see it in the official statistics for China. This stuff really flew below the radar, so it was never really in the production numbers, and you won't see that decrease in the production numbers either. But that source of poor quality steel has been eliminated. And additionally, they've added a maximum surface hardness specification to the standard. The quench and tempered steel is extremely hard on the surface, and surface hardness is something that can be easily measured in the field. So the revised standard is going to drive a tremendous increase in vanadium consumption in China, and we're seeing that just as we speak. In China, there's only about 6 million tons of rebar inventory in the pipeline. That's something less than 2 weeks worth of steel. So in theory, the steel that's going to be delivered to the market on November 1st is going to be produced in the next few days. And what you're seeing right now in China is an extremely tight market with essentially no material available anywhere. So the question, you see 3 scenarios here, is really how much vanadium is going to be available for people to use to make rebar to meet this standard. And regardless of which scenario you look at here, the increase in demand that we're seeing right now is significant. Looking ahead, if you want to forecast what's going to happen with consumption of vanadium, there's primarily 2 variables. One is how many tons of steel are produced each year, and the second is how the specific vanadium consumption rate changes. That is, how many kilos of V are consumed per ton of steel produced. And this line shows this specific vanadium consumption is increasing In summary, vanadium consumption is increasing faster than steel production, which is reflective of the fact that these high-strength, low-alloy steels that use vanadium are very efficient replacements for carbon manganese steel. So we see the ratio of vanadium steels going up year on year. The new rebar standard, again, is going to lead to a surge in consumption right now. We forecast the specific consumption rate to grow at the historical level of 1.9% compound annual growth rate, and we take a rather modest look at steel production growth, and you get a picture that shows you by 2025 consumption of about 133 tons of pure vanadium. When you look at demand, historically, the growth in demand has been driven by growing steel production rates. Looking ahead, really what we anticipate is seeing that the majority of the growth in consumption is going to come from increasing specific vanadium consumption rates rather than ongoing massive growth in global steel production. We can roll this whole picture up and look at production and consumption. What you see here is from 2004 to 2010, production was well ahead of consumption. We had a huge price spike early in 2004 and 5, which stimulated some new production. We also saw the growth in Chinese steel-based vanadium production surging during this period. But interestingly enough, you see from 2010 onwards, really consumption's been ahead of production. And what you see, if you look back, is this period of inventory build and more recently inventory depletion. If we roll this up and look at the change in inventory on a cumulative basis year on year, and we measure the inventory in months of consumption to account for the fact that vanadium consumption has more than doubled over this period, you see a very interesting picture where the inventories by the end of 2017 are back below where they were in 2005, which was a time of very unstable vanadium market. So we've gone through this cycle. I think we saw rationalizations in 2015 and 2016. The market didn't react because we still had excess inventory in the pipeline, but it's clear the excess inventory is gone and the market is showing itself. So I look ahead and make the assumption we're going to have relatively high prices, which is going to stimulate everybody you possibly can to produce. So my forecast is going to show the Windermere mine in Western Australia coming back online, Vanchem in South Africa. I'm going to project all of the stone coal mines in China come back online, which is probably unrealistic given the environmental restrictions. I forecast all of the primary mines are going to go through expansions. We're going to see some incremental increased production as everybody focuses on recoveries and tries to maximize production. And this forecast is going to assume there's no new greenfield vanadium projects on a global basis. And when you put that picture together, what you see here is an environment where supply from existing sources, including sources that are idle today but projected to come back online, are struggling to keep up with the consumption. And once you get to 2022, there is no more growth from existing sources. And by 2025, you've got a gap there of about 22,000 tons of V a year, which is equivalent to 4 major mines. So this picture would clearly suggest there's going to be a need, there is right now, and in the future going to be a need for new greenfield supply. The problem is normally from the time of construction financing to first production in a new vanadium mine is about 5 years. So we're in a situation where it looks like we're going to run at deficits for some period of time going forward. Everybody is watching vanadium has seen these pictures. This picture was put together 10 days ago. That line is still going straight up. It's probably up a third higher than what you see there today. So in total, really, the vanadium market is in a position of short supply, and it's going to take time for that situation to resolve itself. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all these charts. I'll just maybe look at one picture here, a similar picture to what we see in vanadium, this inventory build, and now in this state of inventory depletion as far as molybdenum goes. Seems like every metal is showing a very similar picture. Master alloys, I'm going to leave this subject to my colleague Peter, and so I'll just say thank you for your attention, and again, if you have any questions or comments, please give me a shout. Thanks.